Friday, October 20, 2017. Outside the General Motors Holden plant on the Phillip Highway in Elizabeth, South Australia, police are managing traffic. On the median strips, people have parked Tiranas, Monaros, FJs, cars their fathers drove, cars they grew up in. They're here to watch a factory close. Inside, a red VF Commodore SSV Redline rolls off the production line. Car number 7,687,675. 945 workers board buses to Adelaide Oval, where Jimmy Barnes, who grew up in the shadow of this very plant, plays an unannounced show. Nearly 70 years earlier, Prime Minister Ben Chifley stood beside the first Holden off the line and simply said, "She's a beauty." This is where that story ends. To understand why it ended here, we need to go back to why it started at all. The Australian car industry wasn't built by the market, it was built by a tariff. The 1922 Green Tariff protected local bodywork and forced international manufacturers to assemble vehicles here rather than ship finished cars in. Ford arrived in 1925. General Motors took over a South Australian coach builder called Holden in 1930. Post-war, under Menzies, the whole enterprise was reimagined as something bigger, a defence asset. Proof that Australia could make things and make them here. Industrial modernity. National pride pressed into sheet metal. The tariff wall grew to match the ambition. By the early 1980s, it sat at 57.5%. Behind it, 5 manufacturers, 13 models, 15 million people. In Darwin, 40 registered cars represented 28 different makes. Nobody was building enough of anything to turn a profit without government support. The wall kept the industry alive. It also kept it soft. The OPEC oil shocks of 1973 and 79 hit an industry built around large, thirsty cars for a small domestic market. Petrol prices surged, inflation followed. A wages explosion made local production even less competitive on the world stage. In 1978, Chrysler Australia, bleeding from an over-diversified Valiant range that nobody was buying in sufficient numbers, sold its local operations to Mitsubishi and walked away. The Hawke Labor government came into power in 1983 and inherited a sector on life support. 3 years later, Treasurer Paul Keating went on John Law's radio program and delivered a line that stopped the country. Australia, he said, was at risk of becoming a banana republic. It was blunt, it landed. The protected model had delivered an industry, it hadn't delivered a competitive one. And someone was going to have to say so out loud. John Button was the Federal Industry Minister. He wasn't a car man. He was a pragmatist who understood that Australia's automotive problem wasn't fundamentally about cars. It was about scale. His argument was direct. The industry was too big for too small a market. Better, he said, a small slice of a large pie than a large slice of a small one. The Motor Industry Development Plan, the Button Plan, arrived in mid-1984. 13 locally produced models cut to 6. 5 manufacturers consolidated into 3 production groups. And tariffs on a scheduled decline, from 60% down to 15% by the year 2000. Button even flew to Japan to meet with Toyota and Nissan headquarters directly, bypassing reluctant local management to secure the cooperation he needed. On paper, it was logical, the kind of plan that looks clean in a briefing document. The problem was that to hit the production volumes the plan required, the manufacturers couldn't go it alone. They had to share. Badge engineering was the mechanism. Take one car, fit 2 badges, sell it as 2 different products. Shared tooling, shared production lines, lower development costs, in theory. In practice, it produced some of the most confused products in Australian automotive history. The Holden Apollo was a Toyota Camry. The Holden Nova was a Toyota Corolla. The Toyota Lexcen was a Commodore with bulbous taillights and a new name. The Nissan Ute was a Ford Falcon XF with so few changes that the original Ford oval badge mount was still visible on the grille. Behind the showroom floor, the situation was even more awkward. Holden's chief designer, Philip Zamoud, and Nissan's Paul Berenger were former colleagues. They started meeting in a Port Melbourne pub, quietly, away from their respective head offices, to work out how to make their shared cars look different enough to justify two separate price lists. Their corporate accountants wouldn't fund real differentiation, so they raided Nissan's Japanese domestic parts bin for grills and trim instead. The plan assumed consumers wouldn't notice. They noticed immediately. Buyers chose the donor model over the clone by 7-1 every time. The Toyota Corolla outsold the Holden Nova 7-1. The Camry outsold the Apollo by the same margin. Market research turned up a finding that stung. Identical cars built on the same production line were rated differently based on the badge alone. Nissan badged versions of Holden were perceived as more reliable than the actual Holden. The Lexcen's marketing bravely claimed its owners were a little bit different. Buyers responded with a 7-1 vote for the Commodore. There was one exception, the Ford Maverick. A rebadged Nissan Patrol GQ worked reasonably well because Ford's extensive dealer network could put a capable four-wheel drive into remote communities that Nissan couldn't reach on its own. Capability met distribution. That was the rare case where the logic actually held. Everywhere else, the brand equity that Ford and Holden's had spent decades building was being quietly spent down to fund a policy experiment. Consumer rejection was damaging. The deeper problem was structural, and no amount of better marketing was going to fix it. Every manufacturer in Australia answered to a foreign headquarters, and foreign headquarters had their own factories to protect. The Button plan pushed hard for exports. The government offered import credits to manufacturers who sold vehicles overseas. It offered to fully fund the research and development costs of building a left-hand drive Falcon police car for the American market, an extraordinary commitment for a government trying to wind back industry assistance. Ford's headquarters in Dearborn said no, not because the car wasn't capable, because saying yes meant Australian-built Falcons competing with American jobs. Requests to assemble the Ford Focus and Toyota Kluger locally for regional export went the same way. Tokyo said no, Detroit said no. The export wins that came through were genuine, but they were niche. The Holden Monaro sold in the United States as the Pontiac GTO after a significant internal fight within GM. The Commodore followed as the Pontiac G8, then the Chevrolet SS. Holden engines found their way to European and Korean production lines. These were real achievements by talented Australian engineers. They were never going to generate the volume the plan had been designed around. No Australian government could legislate what a boardroom in Detroit decided. The plan had assumed that rationalisation and quality would make Australian plants indispensable to their global parents. It turned out indispensable was a much harder standard than anyone had anticipated. Without the volume, without the exports, and with consumer faith in the clone cars eroding, the clock was running. Nissan exited manufacturing in 1994. Mitsubishi, the company that had inherited Chrysler's wreckage 16 earlier, closed its Tonsley Park plant in 2008. Ford shut Broadmeadows and Geelong in 2016. Each exit followed the same pattern. Declining market share, government assistance packages that bought time but not survival, and eventually a global headquarters that concluded the Australian plant had no meaningful role in its world footprint. When the Abbott government drew a line on further subsidies in 2013, the last two manufacturers, Holden and Toyota, confirmed what most of the industry already understood. The tariffs Button had scheduled to fall had fallen as intended. The protection that built the industry was gone. What nobody could legislate was a reason for a foreign company to keep building in Australia once the economics said otherwise. 945 workers on buses to Adelaide Oval. Jimmy Barnes on stage, car number 7,687,675, a red Commodore, the last one, already loaded for transport. Roughly 25,000 jobs would go across the broader supply chain. General Motors retired the Holden name entirely in 2020. Today, Australia is one of the largest automotive markets in the developed world and one of the only ones that manufactures nothing. Every government along the way, Labor and Liberal, made rational decisions given what they knew at the time. The protectionists built an industry. Button tried to save it. The multinationals made their calculations. None of it was malicious, all of it was structural. The chain that started with a tariff in 1922 reached its end in a car park in Elizabeth. The tariffs fell as scheduled, the plants closed one by one, and the industry a government built ended quietly on a Friday afternoon in October 2017.